The notification blinked onto my phone screen, a small red dot nestled above the voicemail icon. My stomach dropped as I saw the sender. Mom. A wave of old, familiar tension washed over me, the kind that used to make my chest tighten during childhood scoldings, now echoing even from 2 states away. I was in my apartment, quiet, well-ordered, my own space far from the chaos of the family I'd tried so hard to earn a place in. I took a deep breath. Maybe it was about Thanksgiving plans. Or maybe she needed help reviewing a contract again. I pressed play. Her voice was different this time. Normally, she began her messages with a gentle "Hey, sweetie," or some familiar term of endearment. But this, Eli, she said. Just my name, sharp and dry. No preamble, no affection. Your father, your brother, and I have made a decision regarding the business. We're reorganizing. Effective immediately, you are no longer part of the family company. We're moving forward with a buyout. You'll be hearing from our attorney. Click. That was it. My hand trembled as I lowered the phone, barely catching it as it slipped. Silence closed in around me like a vacuum. The humming fridge and the tick of the wall clock were suddenly too loud. My mind whirled, not just from the blunt rejection, but from what it truly meant, what it erased. That voicemail wasn't just a business maneuver. It was the final act in a slow erosion of trust, belonging, and worth. I sat in shock, replaying her voice in my head. I'd given so much to the company. Not just work, sacrifice, dedication, sleepless nights. The 40% ownership that had once felt like a promise now seemed like a trap I had willingly stayed in. For approval I never received. My grandfather started the business decades ago. A small, hands-on operation that grew on integrity and grit. When he passed away, he split it. Dad got 40%, Mom 20%, and me, Eli, 40%. My older brother, Dean, was still in college back then, too young to be given a stake. Grandpa told me my portion was a legacy, but only if I worked for it. And I did. Straight out of high school, I jumped in head first. I learned logistics, accounting, operations, every piece of the machine. While Dean pursued his business degree, I was already keeping our doors open. Dad never cared for the day-to-day. He left most of it to Mom, who enjoyed the limelight, pitching to clients, polishing our image. Eventually, Dean stepped in and handled operations, though mostly in name. He was charming, presentable, but rarely involved in the messy details like inventory, payroll, or crisis control that fell on me, always on me. Mom would often say, "Eli handles the books. Bless him. He's got a head for numbers, but not for real business." She'd laugh like it was a compliment. Dean would grin and add, "Yeah, our resident bean counter keeps the lights on." I did more than keep the lights on. When cash flow dried up, I was the one who poured personal savings into payroll. I skipped out on vacations, put off buying a car, and let my student loans fester, also I could cover vendor costs or debt payments. I even cashed in investments I made as a teen just to float us through downturns. My 40% became less of a stake and more of a transfusion line, feeding a company that only remembered me when it was desperate, but I stayed, because I wanted to belong, because I hoped, maybe one day, they'd see me as more than a financier. Maybe they'd see me as a real partner, a vital part of the family. I was deluding myself. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. They kept me out of strategy meetings. Dean, who knew little about our finances, was in every important room. Decisions were made, and I'd only find out when something broke and I had to fix it. Mom brushed off my input with that same dismissive smile. Dean always talked over me, especially during family gatherings when business inevitably came up. I was the outsider at my own table, the ghost in every photo. That I told myself I was imagining things, that they loved me, that my role mattered. And then came the voicemail. Final, cold, unforgiving, and I couldn't deny it anymore. I didn't answer it. I couldn't. For hours, I sat there in the suffocating quiet of my apartment. It wasn't until the next day that my fingers stopped trembling long enough for me to start unpacking what it all meant. 3 weeks later, the true betrayal arrived like a slap. I was scrolling through Facebook, absent-mindedly, when I saw the photo. Mom and Dean, all smiles, shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. The caption announced a huge partnership deal for the family business, a bold new chapter, a leap forward. It was news I should have known about. I owned 40% of the company, after all. But I didn't even receive a courtesy call. Seeing it on social media, wedged between beach selfies and baby announcements, felt like being erased from my own life. My name wasn't mentioned. My presence wasn't missed. They had moved on. And they didn't even look back. I called Mom. Why wasn't I told? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Eli," she said lightly. "We meant to reach out. It all happened so quickly. You wouldn't have understood. It was complex business stuff." Dean's voice chimed in from the background. "Yeah, man, you're the finance guy. Let us handle the big picture." There it was again. The minimization, the dismissal. The lie they had fed me for years, that I didn't get it, that I should stay in my corner and keep funding the messes they made. The pain became something sharper, cleaner, cold, furious clarity. And that was the end of the old Eli. After that conversation with Mom and Dean, I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't try to make them see reason. Instead, I responded with a single word, "Understood." Then I made a different kind of move. Quiet, calculated, and final. Over the following 48 hours, I initiated a process that would sever me completely from the family business. But not on their terms, on mine. I called Miles, a corporate attorney I met through a friend of a friend years ago. We talked casually back then about succession planning and shareholder disputes. Now, I needed him for real. I laid everything out. My 40% ownership, my history of pouring personal funds into the business, the voicemail, the partnership I learned about through Facebook, the way they had sidelined me and tried to push me out without due process. "What about documentation?" he asked. "Everything," I said. I had kept receipts. Every dollar I spent propping up the business, emails, transfer records, my own spreadsheets, copies of old agreements. I even had text messages from Mom and Dean thanking me when I bailed them out, messages they likely forgot ever existed. Miles leaned in. "Eli, this changes everything. You're not just a shareholder. You're the guy who kept the business from collapsing multiple times. That's leverage." And with that, the gears began turning. I dug through old boxes, pulled files from cloud storage, cross-referenced emails and bank statements, and constructed a detailed timeline, a ledger of every sacrifice I had made. What started as a personal therapy session turned into an audit-level dossier. It painted a damning picture of their dependency on me, their mismanagement, and the financial quicksand beneath their recent bold new direction. While I organized, Miles reached out to his network. There were private equity groups that specialized in exactly this, acquiring shares in family businesses entangled in toxic power dynamics. One group expressed interest immediately. They didn't care about the drama. They cared about the numbers, and I had those in spades. I met with them virtually and presented everything. I was calm, professional. I didn't trash Mom or Dean. I simply laid out the facts, my 40% ownership, my long history of financial contribution, my removal from decision-making, and the new partnership deal that directly impacted the value of my shares, done without my input or consent. Then I showed them the inconsistencies, the hidden liabilities, the near implosions I had privately resolved. The pattern. They didn't hesitate. Their due diligence began immediately. Within a week, I signed over my 40% share. The ink dried in a glass-walled office across town, while the family business continued on, oblivious. I left with a sizable payout, more than what they likely intended to offer. But that wasn't the real win. The real victory was taking back control, setting the terms, ending the cycle. After finalizing everything, I sent a short email. Subject, voicemail body, understood. And then I waited. At first, silence. But by day 2, the storm arrived, 72 missed calls. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree, text after text, Mom, Dean, to business line. The office manager, even old suppliers. I let it all go to voicemail, then Dean finally got through. "Eli, what the hell did you do?" he demanded, panic thick in his voice. "You have to fix this, just undo it, please." please, undo what? I asked, my tone cool and detached. The investor, they froze our accounts. They're demanding every piece of financial data. They said things don't add up. They're saying there are inconsistencies. We're being audited. His voice cracked. The truth hit him like a freight train. The investor wasn't just a silent partner. They were active. They were meticulous. They had found the trail I had so carefully highlighted. Discrepancies, debts, hidden accounts, misreporting. The skeletons Dean and Mom had buried were now on full display. Eli, he stammered. This could ruin us. You said I was out. I reminded him. Said I didn't understand the real business. That I was just the numbers guy. I didn't mean, but I did. I said. I meant every dollar I recorded, every spreadsheet I archived. Every time I bailed you out without thanks. This is our legacy, he tried. Grandpa's company, don't you care? I paused, letting the silence stretch. I cared for 20 years, I said quietly. You didn't, and I hung up. The flood didn't stop. Their desperation grew more visible by the hour. Now not just messages, but pleas, apologies, veiled threats. I didn't engage. Every response went through miles. Every insult, every guilt trip, every attempt at manipulation was filtered and neutralized by legalese and calm professionalism. Meanwhile, the private equity team did what they were best at. They peeled back the curtain. What they found wasn't just bad management. It was long-term concealment, misappropriated funds, undocumented loans, and debts they never disclosed to the new partner. And thanks to my records, there was a trail. Turns out, a significant portion of the financial patchwork I had provided in earlier years wasn't even properly logged in their official books. They'd quietly taken my help, cleaned up just enough to stay afloat, and swept the rest under the rug. But when someone with real scrutiny came knocking, armed with a forensic team, those swept-up messes came spilling out. As rumors swirled, so did consequences. Vendors started pulling back. Bank partners demanded renegotiation. A client deal fell through. The equity firm now had not just ownership, but authority, and with it, the ability to freeze assets and initiate legal action. Mom and Dean were caught in a net they had built thread by thread. Some of it, I realized later, may have gone even deeper. A former employee tipping off the investor, someone loyal to me or simply sick of being complicit. Maybe it was a supplier who noticed the cracks or a quiet office assistant who knew more than they let on. But the truth came out, and with it, so did justice. The days that followed were chaotic, though not for me. I watched from a distance as the fallout rippled across the family I had once bled for. The investor, now in full control of their 40%, initiated a sweeping internal audit. Everything was halted. New contracts, vendor payments, even payroll was temporarily frozen. Their legal team wasn't just thorough, they were relentless. With my documentation and their own findings, they unearthed a pattern of financial negligence stretching back years. Hidden debts, creative accounting, undisclosed cash infusions. Some of those infusions were mine. They confronted Mom and Dean with reports, questions, and consequences. And this time, there was no Eli to clean up the mess behind the scenes. No quiet transfusions to keep the company alive, just the hard, unfiltered truth. Dean's texts changed tone quickly, from indignation to confusion, then to desperation. One message even read, "We can explain this. You know this wasn't all on us," but I said nothing. Mom tried guilt. "Eli, sweetheart, we're still your family. You're hurting us." No, they had made it clear I was nothing more than a bank account they could close when inconvenient. They had erased me from board meetings, stripped my voice, humiliated me publicly, and only remembered I mattered when the consequences finally arrived. It wasn't revenge I felt, it was release. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the sharp, vengeful way I had been right after the voicemail. I felt a profound, hollow ache. Not for the business, that ship had sailed. But for the family I had imagined I belonged to. The fantasy I had held on to all those years, that they'd someday see me, value me, love me, was gone. The real grief wasn't over what they did. It was over realizing they had likely never seen me that way in the first place. The legal proceedings unfolded slowly. There were talks of restructuring, forced asset sales, and even bankruptcy. The new partner, with every right to protect their investment, wasn't backing down. If anything, they became more aggressive as deeper issues came to light. The company was now toxic, radioactive to any new investor, thanks to the audit reports. Some of my extended family took sides. A few aunts and uncles messaged me, asking what had happened. Others regurgitated Mom and Dean's version, that I had betrayed them, that I'd sold out, that I was greedy. But those who truly knew me, who'd seen my late nights, my sleepless weeks during budget crunches, who remembered me bailing the company out of a supplier crisis with my savings, they stayed quiet. Some sent a simple thinking of you, others invited me over for dinner. That's when I realized who my real family was. My closest friends became my anchor. They reminded me that family isn't always blood. It's trust, respect, mutual care. They didn't ask for explanations. They didn't need justifications. They just showed up. They brought food. They let me sit in silence. They checked in. And for the first time in years, I started to breathe. The weight I carried, the need for approval, the burden of financial rescue, the constant emotional tightrope, began to lift. It left behind scars, yes, but also space. Space to rediscover who I was when I wasn't managing someone else's messes. I saw a therapist. I went on a solo trip to the mountains. I started sketching again, something I hadn't done since college. I reconnected with old friends I'd drifted from while drowning in family obligations. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to reclaim the parts of myself that had been buried under ledgers and expectations. Dean sent one final message a few months later. Just for words, "You really did it." I never reply, not out of cruelty, but because I had finally accepted that some chapters don't end in reconciliation, some people don't change, and some wounds are best left closed, not constantly reopened for the sake of nostalgia or misplaced loyalty. Mom tried once more after that, a letter in her handwriting. It started with an apology but quickly morphed into self-pity. She missed me. She was heartbroken. She didn't know things had gotten so bad. But she never took responsibility. Not really. The words "I was wrong" never appeared. I didn't need to respond, because I had already made peace with the fact that her love came with conditions, and I was no longer willing to meet them. In time, I used the proceeds from my share sale to start something new. Not a business, not yet, but a non-profit financial consultancy aimed at helping small family-owned operations avoid the same mistakes my family made. I poured my skills into helping people who actually listened, who respected the numbers, who respected me. And that was the ultimate redemption, not tearing down what they built, but building something better on my own. I still think about Grandpa sometimes, about what he would have said. I believe he would have been disappointed, not in me, but in what the business became. He believed in hard work, in fairness, in family as a partnership, not a hierarchy. I didn't get to keep the company he left me, but I kept my integrity. And now, standing on this side of the storm, I understand something I wish I'd learned it earlier. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting for a seat at a table where you're not welcome. It's getting up, walking away, and building your own. Signing those exit papers wasn't just a transaction. It was a declaration that I was no longer for sale, no longer desperate for approval, no longer willing to bleed for people who'd never once offered a bandage in return. Sometimes the hardest boundaries are the ones you set with the people you love the most, but those